Hello there, in this video lesson we're going to learn how to save parametric smart objects and finished jewellery items when working with Blender 2.9 and the PyClone add-on and Jewelcraft. So if we go to Blender itself, let me see, let's create a parametric smart object. So if I go to Add Curve, Fluid Designer Curves, I'm going to go to the tennis seam curve, and if I just scroll the center mouse button towards me to just zoom out a little bit, if I just hold down the center mouse button and just rock it, that's the tennis seam curve, and I'll just sort of position it like that, and I prefer the ortho view. If I just open up this panel here, at the moment the resolution is 90. I would tend to recommend that you reduce that somewhat because you get less control points than that. And an important value to identify is that the bevel is 0.5. Now that's actually the radius 0.5, and what that gives you is a round cross section with a diameter of 1 millimeter. Twice the radius, twice the bevel gives you 1 millimeter. So the default thickness here is 1 millimeter, and that's true for all of these objects. Now if I want to add a bevel object, a different bevel object to this, what I can do is go to 3D templates, cross section bevel objects, and if I scroll down to the bottom, and I'll use this square cross section rectangular bevel object. If I drag and drop that onto the workspace and hit the P key on the keyboard and just click outside the box, that will put it in the center of the screen. And if I select my tennis seam object, and if I go to Object Data Properties, scroll down to Geometry and go to Bevel Object, and if I change it to this rectangular bevel object there. So that's just made it a square cross section. We've got an object here. Now at the moment the default name of it is tennis seam, and I'm going to click on here Object Properties. And if I just open up this window here a little bit, I'm going to click in there and put a space between tennis and seam. And I'm going to do bracket, and I'm going to do 301. 301. The 1 represents the fact that this is the first tennis seam parametric smart object that I'm creating. And the 3D identifies the fact, and this is my naming convention, that it's got a height to it in the Z direction. It's not a flat object, this. Now, if you go over to the object library and if you scroll down to patterns parametric, you will see that there are objects here. This has got 301, for example, 302. Well, all of those, if you drag and drop them onto the workspace, anything with a 3 in front of it, so 3 here, will be like this. And so if I scroll right down to the bottom of the screen, I can see the tennis seam ones. And there's a tennis seam 001 and a tennis seam 301. Now they're not exactly like this at the moment. These are saved, the icons are saved with a view from the top rather than this oblique view that I've got at the moment. But essentially we've got a flat version of the tennis seam as 001 and a 3D version as 301. And you can try those later. So what we've got here is tennis seam 301. Now, where can we save this? Well, really the place to save it is here under Patterns Parametric. And add to the library that already exists. But I'm going to open up the panel here, and with assets open, with Jewelcraft selected and assets open, I'm going to create a new folder, create a category, and I'm going to call it 000. That just allows me to save it at the top of the folder list, and I'm going to say smart object. So that's just a folder name. And I'm going to save this tennis seam, and I've already named it 301. So if I click OK and click Add to Library, it will save tennis seam 301 in this new library. So there's just this one asset in the 000 Smart Object library at the moment. Now, if I point at the outliner panel over here and press the A key on the keyboard to select all the objects there and X to delete, I've emptied everything from the screen. And if I click on Import Asset, it will import that 3D tennis seam object, and it will also import the cross-section rectangular bevel object that's associated with it. Now I'm going to now create a 2D tennis seam one. Now I'm going to leave this cross-section rectangular bevel object on the screen. I'm just going to do, with the tennis seam object highlighted, if I just press X on the keyboard and delete that. So I've deliberately left this bevel object there. And what I'm going to do is to go to Add and Curve, Fluid Designer, Parametric Curves, and I'm going to go to Tennis Seam Curve again. So I've recreated that, but notice this is rounded cross section, and if we open it up here, it's because this bevel object is applied to it at the moment. Now I've still got a resolution of 30, the default is 90, but once you change it, and unless you start a new file, it will stay at this one. What I'm going to do is to change this height, and I'm going to set that as 0. And that has flattened it off to 2D. So in other words, it's like this object over here. I know that this 1301 looks flat here. That's just because of when I saved it, I saved everything in top view. So this object here now is the tennis seam. Now we need to rename this before we save it. So we've got object properties there. I'm going to click in. I'm going to put a space between tennis and seam. And I'm going to do bracket, and I'm going to do 001. This is the first tennis seam object, and it's a flat one rather than a 3D one. So there's three. This one here that we saved previously is 301. This is 001. That's my naming convention. And that's what can be seen over here. You can invent your own naming convention if you want. That's my naming convention. And I'm going to apply the bevel object to it, the square one. So it's, at the moment, it's bevel round 0.5. Bevel round 0.5 means a diameter of 1 millimeter, because this is the radius. If I go to bevel object, there's the basic tennis seam curve. When I apply the cross-section rectangular bevel object, this is now 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter square. So it's this one over here. Now, if I press the home key on the keyboard and then just scroll away from me twice to maximize the size, I need the tennis seam object to be highlighted. And if I add this to the library, it will give me tennis seam 001. And when I click OK, that will be added to the library there. Now, if we point to the outliner panel over here, and A to select all the objects and X to delete. Now let's see what happens when we import these assets. So if I import the 3D one first of all, that's what I get. And if I import the 2D one, that's what I get. And notice I get 2 copies of the cross-section rectangular bevel object, because there was one associated with each of those 2 objects. But this one here is actually, if I just open up the panel, if I just open up this window a little bit more, the second one has got 001 at the end here. That just indicates that this has been replicated twice. Okay, so, and if I go over to PyClone, which is what I normally do to drag and drop, the same thing, I'll get the same objects on here. Okay, the only difference between Dualcraft and PyClone is the name is here. And that's why I normally use this to import objects. Now, if I just delete everything there, so A on the keyboard to highlight them all, and X to delete, and I'll just close that panel down for a moment. What I'm going to do now is to create a kind of jewelry item using these objects, and in this case I'm going to use a ring as well. So if I go to the object library and go to jewelry rings, I'm going to scroll right down and I'm looking for a ring size P+. Okay, so here's P plus, and if I just go into top view with Z on the keyboard, if I just, not on the keyboard, in the panel here, if I drag and drop this object onto the workspace and hit P on the keyboard and just scroll back and click outside of the box to center it. So I've got there UK size P plus, and it's got an object connected with it which is 1mm by 5mm, and I'm going to stick to that at the moment. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into edit mode, and I'm just going to click on that control point at the top there, and N on the keyboard to open up this panel. And if I go to the item one here, the transform panel should be open. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change that radius there, and I'll change it to 2. And as you can see, that's thickened up the ring at the very top there. And if I click on Y to look at the value, what I've done by changing this from 1 to 2, I've just splayed out the ring at the very top there. That's all I've done in this case. And if I do Alt A and deselect the control point and go back to object mode, and if I click on Z here to change the view, there's my ring. So I've just splayed it out a little bit at the top, and I could use over here, I could drag and drop this onto the workspace, or I'm going to use Dualcraft in this instance and import the asset there. Okay, so there's my parametric smart object, which is my tennis seam curve. And if I just hold down the center mouse button and rock it, it's actually, I want to put this at the top of the ring, and it works better in a different mode from what it is at the moment. So if I just hit Z key on the keyboard with it selected, if I press R on the keyboard and X to rotate it about the X axis, and if I rotate it 90 degrees, I think that orientation looks better. I'm going to put this at the top of the ring. Okay, so I've just rotated it X 90 degrees. If I move it up now, my intention is to put it at the top of the ring there and create a finished object. Well, it's much too big at the moment, but this is a parametric smart object, and it's got dimensions, a square cross section of 1 by 1, but provided I go into edit mode, if I press A on the keyboard to select all of the control points and S to scale, and then scale that down, the bevel object, provided I'm in edit mode, the bevel object will maintain it as 1mm by 1mm cross section. And if I just go back to object mode, if I just pull that down and just overlap it like that, that's fitting quite nicely on the ring. I could scale it down just a little bit more if I wanted to, but I'm going to say that is essentially my ring. So I've got a parametric smart object at the top and a parametric smart object that's the ring itself. And if I export this to as an OBJ file and run it through NetFab Basic and then upload it to Shapeways, that will 3D print. Okay. So if I go to the Z view now, with the ring selected, I want to save this. Well, if I press the home key on the keyboard to zoom in and scroll away from me twice, the ring is selected at the moment, and that just says UKP plus. Well, I've also got this asset at the top. So if I click on the object properties and just scroll up, what I've got is UKP plus 18.14mm, and then I've also got a tennis seam, and it's 003 object on top of the ring. Now, I've still got 000 smart object here. If I click add to library to save this, it will give me that name, UKP plus tennis seam, and if I click OK, it will create an image of it. Now, if I just delete what I've got on the screen here, and I'll do it by outline of panel, A to select all of them and X to delete. If I now import this ring here with the tennis seam at the top, if I import the asset, I don't get the tennis seam at the top. I get the ring, which is what was selected when I saved this to the asset library, and it says tennis seam name here, but I've got no tennis seam pattern at the top. Now, if I just do A and X to delete with the cursor in this panel over here, that will delete everything. If I just go over here to PyClone and I've just refreshed it by changing out of the folder and back into it. If I drag and drop this onto the workspace and hit P on the keyboard, same thing happens. Both of these asset managers only save one asset at a time. So in this case, the ring. And if I do Control Z and just keep doing it, I think until, I've gone too far there. Edit and redo. If I just do Control Z, I think you've got to do it about 7 times. I will get back to the ring and the tennis seam object at the top. Okay, so if this is a finished object, rather than saving it in the asset library, and I realize that in this course, whether you've done the rings or the Introduction Udemy course, it doesn't matter which one you've done, we've saved all of these objects in those folders. So either the rings folder or the Udemy folder for the earrings and pendants, we've saved all the objects there. We shouldn't really have done that. It's just an introductory course, this, and that's it was easier to save them there to start off with. When you're creating real objects rather than assets, what I have on my system is if I go to my file manager, on my system, I've got a special folder which I call Shapeways, because I upload things to Shapeways. And if I open one of them, if I open the rings one, I've got loads of subfolders, and that's where I save my finished objects. I don't save them here in the Asset Manager. I only save the assets themselves as they are in the folders over here under Patterns. So if we wanted to save this with the two objects together, what I would do is perhaps highlight the ring there, and I would go to File and well, actually, I'm going to change the name of this ring over here to UKP Plus with what is it? Tennis Seam 003. I haven't got a bracket at the end. I'll just put the bracket at the end. And if I just highlight that name there and do Control C to copy it to the clipboard, if I go to File and Save As and go to Documents and go to Shapeways and go to Rings, I need a folder here to save it in. Now I haven't created a folder at the moment, so I'll just cancel. I just realized that I hadn't created a folder. I'll go back to my file manager, go to Rings, I'll create a new folder, and if I do Control V, I will copy that name, UKP Plus 18.14mm Tennis Seam 003 object. And if I go back to Blender now, if I now save this, if I go to File and Save As, and go to Documents and Shapeways and Rings, I should have a folder, UKP Plus Tennis Seam 003. And if I click in there, the file name, and do Control V and do Save As, it will save that in the folder. Now, if I go to File and New and General, if I want to open my finished product, if I go to File and Open, go to Documents, go to Shapeways, go to Rings, look for my finished ring, and in this case I'm looking for UKP Plus, and if I open that Blender file, open the Blender file rather than working with an asset, it will open up and I will have both the tennis seam curve at the top and the ring there. Okay, so the Parametric Smart Object folder has got individual assets, so that one is okay, and you can just rotate it and position it. The 3D version, that one there, tennis seam, is okay as an asset. But this one only brings in the ring and it's just put it on top of the existing one. So it's just made an extra copy of it. I'll just delete it over here. Okay, so really with Dualcraft and with PyClone, you should just be saving individual assets. Don't save them to 000 Smart Object. Create your parametric smart objects and try and save them in the folders that we've created for you over here. So the parametrics would be the one really, although there are a couple of them there. You could add them to the parametrics folder and just, instead of 001, do 002. Instead of 301, do 302. Whatever the numbering is in there. Okay, so that's how to save parametric smart objects and finish jewelry items when working with Blender 2.9 with Dualcraft and PyClone. And that's my naming system, but you can use your own system if you want. So thank you for watching.